Wherever you'd like.
Sort of.
And you're not visible right now, are you? Oh, there's our picture up there.
Yeah.
Well, let me, I think we're on record, yes. So I want to introduce Steve Ellis, who's here with us and has multiple bits of information about things that concern us all. Maybe prostate cancer related, maybe more broadly related to our general health. And you know, he talks about biohacking, which is one of the things that kind of struck me as a term that was of interest. And but I know it goes way beyond that. And I think maybe I just let Steve take over, if that's all right with you, Steve.
Sure.
Ready to roll?
Do you want to go to gallery
You
view?
want to let all these other people in?
Oh my gosh, yeah. How did we get there?
At mid all up top.
Right there.
Cool. And then, do you want to go to Dave? Do you want to go to gallery view? And yeah. Okay.
I apologize, guys, for not seeing the admit all. So welcome aboard. I've just introduced very briefly Steve Ellis, who's here and has lots of information that hopefully will be of interest to all of us, whether prostate specific or not. We all have our health to be concerned about at all times. So in any event, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Ellis, and I'm going to let in a couple of more people. Okay. Again, to those who have just joined, it's my fault, but welcome aboard, and here's Steve Ellis. So I hopefully have you all not on mute at the moment.
A couple people with video cameras off. We're getting excited, Steve. Just keep jumping in.
Hey, everybody.
Hopefully we've got everybody in or close to it. And Frank, if you could unmute, unless you would prefer to stay muted, that's fine. But Ed McManus, we've got you without a camera. Okay, now we've got you in. It's quite the control mechanism I've got here in my hand.
Yeah.
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, we're recording this, but if any of you have any preference for us not to disseminate it, please let me know. The reason we were recording it is that there are people that have asked that cannot make the meeting and would like to know what transpires during the meeting, so that's why we do it. But again, if you prefer not to be involved in that, you can simply close off your camera and mute yourself, if you prefer. But given that, I'm going to move ahead and what's this start doing?
We want to just dismiss that.
Okay, I think we're all ready to roll. Can you all hear me? Can you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, Steve.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody, for having me here. I'm very grateful to be able to share 40 years of messing around with fitness and nutrition and lifestyle. And I guess to start, a little bit about me. It's actually me and Tony. I met Tony 25 years ago. I started a concept fitness center in Sarasota, and Tony had a business next door. And he came in to train. And then I think this is right. I think you actually did a little training with clients, right? Like you had.
I did a little bit. Yeah, I started doing some clients and then.
Yeah, so he was actually a trainer for a bit. But you know, Tony struck me way back then as being somebody that's really noble and honorable and truthful and incredibly loyal. And he has this mischievousness still to this day. He had it then. And I've always sort of been an admirer, and I have a guy crush on Tony. And I've had that for years. Anything he does, I look up to. So just thank you, Tony.
Yes, and thank you for coming. Can't,
Absolutely.
I know I was honored to have you be here. I was to have you say yes, and I think you have such a background in so many people in your family have been diagnosed with cancer. I think I would start there. Why you started? How did you get involved in this, other than just wanting to be fit?
Yeah, that's a great. I actually am here because when I was a kid, I couldn't breathe. So it all started with, with really bad childhood asthma. I was hospitalized, and I had, back then they didn't have inhalers, and so I literally had to take this licorice stuff and in a teaspoon, and then I had to wait it out. And when you can't breathe, everything comes really into focus. And I think somewhere around 15 or 16, on a winter's night, it was raining in Connecticut, and it was like 1 in the morning, and I was coming onto a bad asthma attack, and I was just like, excuse my French, but I was just like, F this. And I got up, and I put on some shorts, and I went out, and I ran, like in the middle of the night, I just started running. And I ended up coming home soaking wet, freezing cold, and my asthma was way, way down. And what had happened was, I didn't know it then, but when you get really, really cold, it stimulates something called neuroepinephrine, and neuroepinephrine will open passages in your lungs and your airways. And so that was a really big moment for me, because I realized no one was really going to take care of my breathing. No one could fix me. My mom would just sit there and look at me, and I would get worse and worse, or I wouldn't get worse and worse if I could get control of it. But that's when I realized early on that really other people weren't going to fix this situation. I had to figure it out. And what I had to figure out was that part, which was getting my heart and lungs going, but also sort of learning a way to calm myself down, because with asthma, it's very much a loop that as you get more tense and anxiety-ridden, your mast cells in your lungs create more histamine. That histamine creates a constriction of the lungs, because that's a natural thing, and things get worse and worse and worse. And so asthma is sort of like a negative feedback loop. So anyway, that's how I got started. And then, when I was 10, my mom was diagnosed with cancer and went in the hospital, and I was told she wouldn't be coming out. And I realized that all of her brothers and sisters, she had 9 of them, they all died of cancer. My dad had prostate cancer. My brother, who was a year older than me, had his prostate removed last year, or 2 years. So way, way back, I started paying attention to cancer, because I knew it was in my blueprint. And then, some years back, I was an early adopter for 23andMe. I got a 23andMe analysis done and saw the markers or the flags for cancer, and it made a lot of sense in terms of, I'm missing a group of genes that help move toxins out of the body. And so, I've realized all my life that my odds of getting cancer are high, but it's what can I do? How can I live? That's what started me on this process. How can I live in a way where I could sort of maybe keep myself from getting cancer? But that led me down all these other paths. And I realized today I'm here just because I wanted to hang out with you guys and have a conversation. So a lot of this is dependent upon you guys with your input and questions. I've got like 40 years of stuff in my head. I've worked in a clinical setting for so long. I've seen 30 to 35,000 sessions. I've seen individuals, probably 1,000 individuals that I've worked with. So I got a lot of stuff up in my head. And so questions are what are going to fire up all kinds of stuff.
You stated something earlier in your message that really strikes me, and it's always struck me, and that is the role of stress in not only hay fever and asthma, but particularly with regard to prostate cancer specifically, or any cancer.
Yeah.
And the role that stress plays not only before you're diagnosed, but after you're diagnosed and while you're going through treatment and after you've finished treatment. I mean, at all levels, stress is such a great.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. If you look at, like, here's how I was thinking about this morning, because I was thinking about stress. If you look at like the town of Sarasota and like the police force, and let's say that we all know that there's going to be a whole group of gangs coming into Sarasota, and we've got to get our police to protect our town. So we get our police force up and running. What happens is, if the police force is up and running, the code department is not going to be driving their trucks around and checking on code, because there's literally not enough trucks, there's not enough gasoline. So I guess the analogy is that if you're in a fight or flight response, then the system in your body that sets up your immune system isn't going to work. Your immune system goes on hold. If you're running from a tiger, you're not going to be making T cells or B cells that are going to go out and scavenge cancer cells. So when you're under stress, your immune system goes down, and your defense system goes up. So you're in this other kind of mode. So I guess that's one way of looking at stress, is that your immune system is terribly compromised when you're under stress.
What do you recommend dealing with stress?
Yeah, so first establishing that stress, this thing called cortisol, sets up this stress response. And so, the next question is, what about stress? Like, how can you respond to stress? And I think that the first thing to do is to realize that you're having stress. So that would be like the biggest thing, is just to have a conversation with yourself where you're open to things aren't quite right. And then we could go down other paths of, like, communicating that to somebody else, realizing that whatever kind of mindset you have, like if you have strategies for dealing with stress in terms of people to talk to, we'll start with the social part. And then, when I said about a cold environments, there's something fascinating about hot and cold. I know this is a biohacking trick, and I'm just going to let these things sort of pop out of my head, but taking a very, very hot shower and a cold shower will set up that same epinephrine response, that thing that will put you in a different state. It puts you in a kind of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's the rest and digest part of you, that gets kicked up. So turning on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest system, and turning off your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, those are really important concepts to sort of get together. So I think, the first thing about stress is just to look for where it might be showing up, or how it's showing up in your behavior. If you're reaching for things that are sort of like your strategies for coping with stress, and you realize that you're reaching for those things and they're not exactly. There's a real difference between nourishing yourself and coping. And coping is what you do to sort of handle the stress, but it is not the same as nourishing yourself. So nourishing yourself would be just going somewhere quietly and doing something simple like box breathing. So when you breathe a certain way, carbon dioxide actually gets created in your body, and that will also trigger the parasympathetic response. So there's a technique called box breathing, where you take 5 counts in, hold for 5 counts, exhale for 5 counts. On the exhale, you hold for 5 seconds, and then you inhale. So breathing is one of the biggest overriders, or it pulls the rugs out from under stress. You literally can't. There are some stress strategies that I love, because you have no choice but to calm down. Like you could have a conversation with your wife or somebody you care about what's bugging you, and that would help bring it down.
Sure.
But there are physiological things that you can do that will literally take you out of your stress response. And so breathing is one. There's another form of breathing, and I don't know if you guys want to take notes or not, but this form of breathing is fantastic. It was developed by a Russian. It's called Buteyko. Buteyko breathing. Buteyko. Incidentally, I have created so that you guys can actually go to some resources. I've created a resource sheet, and I'll get your emails, if that's okay, from David, and I'll send you this sheet, and it has links to researchers and scientists where I've gotten my information, because all of my information comes from PhDs that study oncology, or they study longevity, or they study lipidology, which is your blood lipids that are in your blood. So I'm really into research. So anyway, I was talking about how you can do certain things that will just sort of pull the rug out from under stress. Do you want me to keep going on that?
You know, I would, yeah, because I think stress is so huge. But you know, I would think every one of us in this room has a couple of things that they do. One is recognize their own stress level, which is not always that easy. And you have to really be aware of yourself and say, whoops, wait a minute, I've reached a stress point where I need to do something. And then two is that you have something that you do. And in my case, for example, it's to get to the water. You know, if I can get to the ocean, the canal, or wherever, any place that soothes me in that regard. Having been born and brought up on the water, that's maybe why, but regardless, that's where I go.
Right.
And I might just sit there. I might read a book, but I might just sit there and watch the water, and watch the waves, and watch the trees, and so on. But I would bet every one of us has done at least that much.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and I think it underscores the relationship between doing that as a nourishing thing and doing something else as a coping thing. Like a coping thing might be pour yourself a drink or watch TV, and those will actually create. They won't take the stress response and remove it. The stress response literally has to be physiologically removed. That's the data on that. It's like, so anyway.
But that breathing exercise that you talk about, I know.
Breathing is another one. I mean, I don't know. Does anybody have anything they do that? I mean, there's like a dozen different things that.
I would assume something like meditating would do that. Is that what
Right.
you're thinking?
So there are some people that are meditators that gravitate towards that.
Exercise.
Movement, right? Movement will immediately do it. Does anybody have like a secret weapon that they use when they're stressed out?
Nobody's stressed out.
I don't know what you guys are doing there.
We're very relaxed.
You guys are like super relaxed. What do you do?
I box read. I've been
Okay.
doing that for a long time. And then I exercise, either ride a bike or I paddle a kayak.
Right.
And those three things, and meditate after I've done my box breathing because it really slows me down.
Right.
Then after that, I mean, I run 3 days a week and paddle 3 days a week, which gives me a 6-day week, which is kind of nice to get an extra day.
Right.
But that's what does it for me.
Yeah. So there's 2 or 3 things. Yeah, and music. Some people will listen to music, and music has a frequency to it that can really immediately bring on the relaxation response.
Yeah.
So so stress is huge. That's one of the pieces. I'm imagining that, I don't know if anyone is interested, but some of the sort of fascinating information about biohacking and lifestyle is that, like in the last 5-6 years, well, first of all, science has been democratized by the internet. So if you're interested, you have a desire, you can jump on to PubMed, which is the government published medical study resource page, and if you have a topic, you type it in, and you can get all kinds of studies on what you're interested in, and those studies have been made available to everyone. So we all have the same kind of information that your doctor has at this point, and there are about I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 million studies that come out a year, so that the odds of your doctor being up on all the latest studies are pretty low. And so that's why, again, I go back to that as an addict who figured out he had to do it himself. You're gonna wanna find out stuff yourself. It's pretty fascinating, and a big part. Oh, okay. I don't even need them, Tony.
Okay, I was just
Okay,
going
thank you.
to
Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so a big part of a biohacker. Now remember, biohackers are scientists for the most part. They've taken a keen interest in these interventions that can be done that will affect the 5 big diseases, you know, heart, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular, dementia. What am I missing? Those are all, at this point, have been found to be influenced 80% by lifestyle. In other words, your genes are like a gun that's loaded. The environment that you place yourself in, that's like the trigger that pulls the gun. And that field is called epigenetics, which all that means is that your genes can be turned on and off. And they're turned on and off by these lifestyle interventions. Food is not just something that you eat, but now it's been found that food is like a set of instructions. It will tell certain genes to turn on and certain genes to turn off. And certain foods turn certain genes on and certain genes off. And when you eat your food, will turn certain genes on and certain genes off. So if you're eating late at night, the genes that are supposed to be turning off, they stay turned on. So a lot of the science community, the longevity community, they're encouraging folks to, you know, stop eating at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and not to eat food again until the next morning. So that would be just a regular circadian fast. So that gives your body a chance to, just like in a restaurant, the restaurant's got to clean on the off hours. Your body literally, your brain has something called the lymphatic system, so that at night your brain actually flushes itself out. This was found out in the last 5 years. So your brain literally flushes itself out, and it goes through your cerebral spinal fluid, and it clears out metabolic waste, metabolites, and byproducts. And your whole body does the same thing at night. So it's really important that those genes are turned on. So the field of epigenetics is showing us that certain lifestyle interventions will turn on genes and certain ones will turn off genes. And that's where this idea of biohacking has come from, is that we're much more responsible for what's happening to us on a cellular level than we had any dreams about even 15 years ago. And so some of the lifestyle interventions that researchers work with are sleep, timing of sleep, ways of getting into a deep sleep, food, when to eat it, when not to eat it, what kinds of foods will keep your body in a less inflamed state, and what kind of foods will make your body more inflamed. And when you look at cancer or any disease, inflammation is one of those drivers. It's one of those levers of disease. It's like fundamental to all of our diseases. It's a high inflammatory, systemic inflammatory rate.
Now, is that individualized or is that like across the board?
Across the board, flat out. In fact, they don't. they're now hooking up inflammation with aging, and the term is inflammaging. Like that literally inflammation is what is upregulating most of your disease process, all of your disease processes, flat out. I mean, it's like kind of unarguable at this point. And what drives inflammation? Stress is one thing. Lack of movement, dehydration, not drinking enough water, not having hydrated cells that can move metabolites out of the cells and good stuff into the cells. Sunlight is what will bring inflammation down. Circadian rhythm, where we talked about this, Fletch. If you get up in the morning and get a really big, strong dose of sunlight, that tells your system to turn off the melatonin that's been secreted to help you sleep and turn on the cortisol, and that will also help it at the other end of the spectrum. When you go to bed at night, you'll after you've done this a bit, most likely that will affect your sleep in a really positive way, that you'll be sleeping deeper. So one of the common hacks or biohacks given to people is just get up early and get as much bright sun as you can, as early as you can. So that's like a simple quote-unquote biohack. And it's surprising how powerful sunlight is. It doesn't just make vitamin D, it makes something in the body called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide also opens capillaries and starts a whole other process going on. And if you want to get even more, go down that rabbit hole there, we all have cells that are influenced by light. And there's something in cells called cytochrome C. It's literally a receptor that responds to light. So, light has so many effects on mood, genetics that are turned on by light.
What about too much sun?
Yeah, so at this point, one of the researchers that I listened to said, look at your body like as a big solar panel, and it's meant to collect sun. So if you think about it, if you were to lie on your back and let sun hit your back for like 20 or 30 minutes, or get it, maybe you don't want it on your face, maybe you don't want it all over your body. But yeah, there's going to be a point where there's too much sun. And so the general recommendation is if it's 20 minutes of sunlight. Just a piece of trivia that I find really interesting is that the majority of melatonin, they did a study and showed that office workers who get no sun have higher rates of melanoma than folks who get sun. And you can always fact check me on this stuff, but that's a really fascinating thing. If you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You're outside of the normal circadian environment that we're used to. And that brings us to another big subject, which is the environment. Like one thing that longevity and aging researchers are finding is that our bodies are set up for a certain environment, and we no longer have that anymore. So there's this thing called an environmental mismatch, where we're really designed to be in the sun, we're designed not to eat very often. Like if your ancestors would die if they didn't eat in 3 or 4 days, none of us would be here today. In other words, there's this principle in the longevity and disease research community called hormesis. And hormesis is the idea that we're supposed to have struggle, that we're supposed to be cold, that we're supposed to be hungry, that that's where all of this, you probably heard of intermittent fasting, or depriving yourself of food for a period of time every day. So it's sometimes it's called the feeding window, or time restricted eating. That when you don't eat, again, your body goes into this alternative mode where it's going to consume something because you're getting up and you've got to go hunt, and you have to have the energy to hunt. And so you're going to go out there and you're going to run like hell, and you're going to get your spear, and maybe you don't get anything that day and you go to bed hungry again. So now you're on your second day of night eating. Well, your body is going to start consuming, you know, the low-hanging fruit inside your body. But the things that it's going to start consuming are broken cells, damaged cells, what are called senescent cells, which are those are the cells that have been turned off because they've aged to the point where they're no longer useful, but they still stay in your body. And what they do is they secrete molecular cell signals that drive inflammation. So if you think about it, if you're not eating and you deprive yourself of, let's just say, breakfast, your body is going to go scouring through the system, and it's going to collect and pick up and literally consume these cells, these fatty cells. And if you're overweight, your body is going to start consuming the fat that's in your body naturally. So, anyway, I got on a roll there.
No, but it's interesting because you talk about deprivation, really. I mean, you're talking about intermittent, this whole theory of intermittent dieting or intermittent eating.
Intermittent fasting, yeah.
Fasting, whatever, has been pretty popular of late. And but what are your thoughts on what the proper segmentation is? I mean, should you eat 3 times a day, 5 times a day?
Right.
It's 10 times a day.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's very personal. But the overall concept is that, I mean, some folks will avoid eating at, you know, like their last meal will be 4 o'clock and their first meal will be like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever, however that. The 16-hour window is generally looked at as a really good sort of all-inclusive intermittent or time-restricted window. And then it's what you eat, because now we're getting into some really fascinating parts about food, like food that drives insulin in your body, which is driven by sugars. When insulin goes up in your body and stays there because you're consuming a lot of sugars, especially after a fast, insulin is not a great thing to have in your body over a period of time, because what it does is it goes after the endothelium, the lining of your blood vessels, for one thing. It's like a very caustic. So what you eat after a fast, you probably want to think about not eating foods that would drive your blood glucose up or your insulin up. So that would be foods that are like neutral. Not a lot of carbs, not a lot of sugars. So after you fasted, if you want to sort of mimic, it's called a fasting mimicking diet, then you're going to stay in a diet that is lower in carbohydrates, higher in vegetables, cooked vegetables, healthy oils, healthy fats, and good quality proteins. And that would be like a glucose neutral diet. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I can just toss out information. But does anybody have anything that comes up, like questions or blowback or any?
Do you have like some of this stuff written down? Like, I know you have some.
I have resources like some of the resources that I'll give you are an oncologist who worked at the Salk Institute, Dr. Rhonda Patrick. I don't know if anyone's heard her, but she's hugely popular. Go ahead.
Have you ever visited or lived in Spain?
No.
The restaurants in Spain don't even open till 10 p.m. Dinner begins at midnight. And that's true for the whole society and has been for a very long time. I've just wondered if anybody has looked at what that has meant for the Spanish in terms of their health and so on, given these ideas about when you eat it now.
That's a great question. And then you want to look also at the nature of that Spanish diet, especially over time. And then also, if they're eating that late, you know, what do they do in the morning, and how do they have a big breakfast? Do they have breakfast? Do they have coffee and then they're off and about? So in a weird way, it might be, you know, sort of following that time-restricted window. But I would say that the longevity community would probably look at that and say there are going to be If they're going right to bed, Franklin, then that's one thing. But if they're staying up after their meal, and they go to bed and the digestive process has largely taken place, then I would say they're probably sort of nuancing it, you know, in a way that's still not detrimental or not harmful. But that's a great question.
There must be some studies on that, I would think. You know, that's a very interesting question. And it's true in South America and a lot of countries as well.
Right.
Yeah, they do stay up till 2 or 3 and go to bed. They don't wake
Yeah.
up particularly late because the business hours are normal business hours. But then in the old days, and still somewhat today, they take a long siesta. So
Yeah.
they don't sleep a whole night, but in the middle of the day, they take a 2 or 3 hour sleep. And I wonder how that fits into all the rhythms and so on. And their food is not particularly healthy.
Yeah, I think I have had some friends who have gone to Spain and said it's pretty amazing food, basically. But I think if you looked at that food, well, there's another way of kind of zooming back a little bit and looking at this. I think what we're talking about is like an optimal way to live. Like to sort of like, you know, I was a carpenter and a boat builder a long time ago, and you know, you get a plane and you plane the wood, but if you planed against the grain, it was a lot harder. And I think what this sort of philosophy is that you want to try and work with the grain of the body and go with as many things as possible that would follow its natural rhythms, its natural way of metabolizing. And yeah, you're going to have outliers, you're going to have cultures, you're going to have countries, but if we all traveled back 50,000 years and observed the lifestyle and the way people lived, I think that's the sort of the concept that the anti-aging community and the longevity community and the age community is looking at. Not that we would forego any of the modern things that have been so great, but that environment is what produced this amazing human being. That environment produced the most incredible digestive system, the most incredible cardiopulmonary system, and the most incredible cerebral system. And that environment is very different than the environment we're in now. And in that environment, you know, there were no sugars. You know, there was no, I mean, I used to describe this to people as like if you were in a 747 40,000 years ago and you got dropped off anywhere on the planet Earth and all of a sudden you plunked down, you'd have nothing to eat. You certainly wouldn't be able to survive on vegetables for more than a day or two. You literally couldn't get enough vegetable matter in your system to give you the caloric output to build a shelter, sleep under the you've seen Naked and Afraid. Has anybody seen that show? You cannot live without high calorie, you know, you're going to have to eat a certain thing at that point, and you're going to have to sleep cold, and you're going to have to miss meals. Well, that environment created this supreme, superb physiological person that we are today. And so many of these researchers are going back and looking at, well, what are the pieces of that environment that we can say really worked, and how come? And so anyway, that I think, yeah, you've got all kinds of cultures that eat and do differently, but just looking at it from a standpoint of trying to go with the way our genes are designed and not to go in a different direction, that's a lot of the biohacking mentality. Yeah. Any other comments, questions, criticisms?
What does biohacking really mean?
Yeah, so using biological interventions to enhance, lengthen life,
Yeah.
right?
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And it's almost a way of saying this is not the normal definition of aging is not where the biohacking community goes. They want to have an abnormal way of, the idea of biohacking is to have a really, really long health span so that you live healthy for as long as you can, and then you go. And that's kind of like the mentality. Rather, the lifespan. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you address the whole issue of our deliberate or undeliberate use of or imbibing toxins?
Yeah, give me an example. I don't have your name up on board, but give me an example.
Ed Weinsberg.
All right, Ed, yeah. What kind of toxins do you talk of?
Both the edible kind and the perfume industry, not to mention those who still, for some reason unknown to me, continue to use cigarettes, a whole variety of things, or behaviors. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's just habitual, sometimes it's unknowing, but our whole environment is filled with toxicity. And I guess the question here then is, what are the ways to eliminate that toxicity, no matter what the source in the environment?
Yeah, so that's the major, I mean, that is one of the big tenets of the functional medicine group, is that environmental toxins are called the exposome. So everything that we're exposed to is part of this load, this toxic load that we take on. It becomes a toxic burden when the body can't remove those toxins fast enough or efficiently enough, and then they build up and they cause inflammation again. The body's response to toxins is going to be an inflammatory response. So, yeah, that's a big question. I mean, I think you said most of it. It's the idea is we're exposed to an enormous amount of toxins that we weren't exposed to. I'm 66. When I was, 10 years old, there were like, I don't know, 3,000 toxins that were known out in the environment. Now there's over 70,000 and more produced all the time. So one of the biggest ways of assisting your body to remove toxins is by sweating. There are these things that is created when you sweat called heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins are they're responsible for initiating a lot of pathways in the body that eliminate toxins. And literally sweating will remove heavy metals. So there's a lot of science on sweating and saunas, by the way, and I've included Dr. Rhonda Patrick has a lot of sources on studies that have shown what happens when a person takes a sauna 3 times a week, what happens when a person takes a sauna 5 times a week, how their all-cause mortality is much different than the rest of the population. But in general, you could say that sweating, be it through exercise or creating an environment that's very hot, like a hot bath, it initiates these things called heat shock proteins. And all the proteins in your body that are made, which they do everything, they are made by a complicated folding process. And it's like an origami folding. Each protein is folded in a different way. And what heat shock proteins do is they manage that folding process, and they regulate it. And so if proteins are misfolded, and they're created and misfolded, they don't work right. And so what they found with saunas is that taking a daily sauna or every other day sauna has an amazing effect on the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system, Alzheimer's, the brain, because all those mechanisms are activated when you're under a stress, heat stress. And so that literature has been in the last 10 years, but it's so strong that my wife and I literally built a sauna 7 years ago, and we use it almost every day. But there are a lot of good quote-unquote hacks if you don't want to build a sauna to create an environment where you're hot and sweating. But it is tricky. But it's one of the greatest tools you can use as a detoxifier. So yeah, I appreciate that question, because it's a matter of avoiding things, and then it's also a matter of helping things get out.
I have another question, if I could. I want to, and this is me, I'm 10 years older than you, and my energy levels are dissipating fairly consistently. What would you recommend as a biohack to re-energize oneself?
I would start really simple, like this all has to do with mitochondria, which are the little batteries that are in each of your cells. And mitochondria, if mitochondria are being taken care of, and I know this is going to sound really strange, but certain organs have so many mitochondria. The cells have so many. Your brain, your heart, your liver. They're packed with mitochondria, and those are your energy producers. And that analogy that we gave I gave in the beginning about the police force, if you think about it like gasoline, if you're giving all your gasoline to your police department, which is your defense system, and none of your gasoline to your code enforcers or the people that check the power lines or the people that are watching out to make sure that you're doing the construction correctly, then your body's going to be very, very compromised. And so you want to have really, it's called upregulated mitochondria. So, and the way to upregulate mitochondria and have really good mitochondrial function is to start simple. You know, look at your circadian rhythms and see if you're getting a good night's sleep. If you have a sleep tracker to kind of be able to tell how much deep sleep are you getting in a night and how much REM sleep are you getting in a night. So sleep is a really big one. That's definitely, what's the word? That's definitely manageable by most people. Like to figure out, get up early, make sure you get out of bed even before you're ready to get out of bed, and then go to bed at the same hour every night. Sleep in a dark room, make sure it's cold, don't watch devices before you go to bed, don't get blue light, which just comes from the devices, don't stimulate your brain watching TV right before you go to bed, don't have a big meal right before you go to bed. So those things ensure a better night's sleep. So that's one way of starting the process of getting more energy. Another way is to skip a meal in the morning so that your body has to start to consume these inflammatory byproducts which are causing systemic inflammation. So as odd as it sounds, skipping a morning meal or skipping an evening meal, having water and coffee, and then going out for a morning walk and getting direct sunlight. How do those sound so far?
That's really good, and sleep is a major issue for me.
It is for everybody over the age of 66. We all start, it's a fascinating sort of like a domino effect with sleep, but I'm a sleep fanatic because I have been an insomniac in various times in my life. And now, unfortunately, everybody's making sleep into the #1 fitness tool, and for most of us, it's one of the hardest ones to get a handle on. But as you age, sleep is probably one of your best ways of keeping yourself from a recurrence in cancer, because your body is going to be, it fights off everything better when you've got the right sleep. So anyway, mitochondria, you guys got to keep me on track time-wise.
Okay,
Yeah,
I just had a question for Ed. How much do you exercise?
Oh, I walk the dog 4 times a day, and I play
Ed,
tennis.
Ed, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, really? Oh. Okay. No, according to this, I'm okay.
No, we're
Yeah,
good.
you
We're
are.
good. We lost you for a second there.
Yeah.
I didn't hear your response.
Yeah, I play tennis twice a week, and I walk the dog 4 times a day, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but here's the thing that a lot of folks don't understand about energy. Because I work with people that don't have energy all the time, and they can't exercise because, you know, I mean, I've had clients that are very, very sick and their mitochondria are operating on no gas at all. And so the idea to have them do something physical, it's not going to work. So it's almost like you want to go at this in the most gentle, nourishing way you can, so that gradually your mitochondria will start. Mitochondria is the big issue of 2000 and whatever. If you type in mitochondrial health or bioenergetics, you'll find that much of this comes down to these little energy molecules, energy organelles in your cells. So getting your mitochondria up to speed does involve nourishing yourself, the things that I spoke about, and doing that over a period of time, so that one morning you wake up and you go, I'm ready to go for a walk. You know, I'm ready to go out in the sun. I'm ready to do a couple of lunges in between two chairs. I'll just try it. What the hell? You're going to have a harder time doing those exercises if you don't have mitochondrial support, if you don't have the support in your system. You can't sustain that. So what I'm suggesting is, you know, that whole idea of just making some lifestyle changes and some things that will help your body get its energy back. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it makes sense, but there's one other element which particularly troubles prostate cancer survivors, and that's true of getting older, but also specifically prostate cancer survivors. Our testosterone is way down. So do you have any biohacks for natural ways?
The what?
Do you have any biohacks for natural ways to raise up one's testosterone level?
They can hear me.
Well, we're kind of going to go back around again, because physical muscle type of exercise will raise testosterone. Eating a good protein diet will raise testosterone, but at the same time, you probably know, you have to be careful with testosterone and cancer. So there's this weird relationship with them. But, you know, generally, Ed, I would say that I would be just trying to get my energy levels up in general, and trying to get my system so that it was more energetic, and then like focusing on testosterone as the next thing. And I don't want to be glib about this because I don't know your situation, but I don't know, does anybody have any other input on that? I mean, in terms of testosterone, like, I mean, we're looking at trying to create more energy, and we're looking at trying to create more testosterone, and I think you want to have a more energetic body that can do more and that's more open to doing more, and then I would be putting the testosterone on another platform a little bit underneath that. I don't know if I'm making any sense on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you saying that testosterone is like a form that you can get the energy, but there's other avenues available for energy rather than just looking at testosterone?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it too. Yeah, I would say that. Like, again, I would go back to looking at your body from a big view, that you know, a zoomed out view as this beautiful organism that needs certain things, and it's needed them since it was born, and those things are good food, good water, good sleep, sunlight, and some movement. And in terms of like you know, and in low stress and ways of dealing with stress. And then
Good, I'm on
when
the
you're
line.
doing those things, you can start to move into granulating it and getting more fine-tuned. But apparently, according to the CDC, there are 5 healthy behaviors. I think not smoking is one, exercising is another, eating, not overeating, and only 10%, no, 6% of Americans are able to do those 5 basic healthy behaviors. So it's really hard to just look at, you know, looking at your body as this creature that wants and needs certain inputs to be happy and healthy. And the more of those things that you can do on a regular basis, and the less things that you can do will contribute to that energy, you know. And then as a biohacker, I mean, I could always, there are so many different tricks and strategies and hacks for creating mitochondrial energy and for creating testosterone. But at the same time, in this environment right here now, I just feel like the safest conversation is just about trying to start out here and make sure those things are being handled, and then go in a notch if you're still feeling like you've got those things handled and you're not at the health that you want to be, then going in another notch, and then going in another notch, because there are lots of circles that move in, and there's lots of things that are out there for you to try. Yeah.
Can I ask a PS to that? The very last
Yeah.
thing you said. I'm only speaking for people like me who do not have prostate cancer anymore. And I just reached my 12th year, I think. Yeah. 13th year since I had the prostatectomy. No indications of any further difficulties for me. Now, so I was a 6, you know, Gleason 6. Others who are listening in still have it in their systems definitively and are on all kinds of things. So I'm not going to recommend testosterone of any kind, natural or synthetic, for those folks, but I'm pretty convinced, especially in the light of a book by Morgenstern, who exploded the myth of testosterone and prostate cancer for folks like me, that it would help add energy. So just on your resources, could you send people those specific facts for us who want to work on that?
Hey Ed, you're gonna have to Ed, you're gonna have to say most of that. Like when you started your question, we lost you.
No, what I'm saying is lots of us cannot take testosterone.
Got that.
Had the test. Those who have prostatectomy like me in 13, 14 years ago, without incident, I'm ready to raise testosterone in organic, natural ways. If you could add to your resource list some of those specific hacking devices you're alluding to, that would be helpful.
I will do that. There's a lot of literature on things called peptides, which are that's the next sort of place for I guess influencing the body in a positive way. Peptides that are made by the body itself. But yeah, I'll do that. Dave, would you write that down?
Yeah, I am.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions, comments?
I think, don't mean to speak for you, David, but
You can.
I think it would be kind of good, after all this, because there's so much information, is, everybody write down some questions and some things they'd like to hear more about, and maybe we look at doing something again in a month or two
Yeah.
or something, you know, what you
Yeah.
feel you missed saying, or what
Yeah,
you feel you
right.
should have said more of, what you guys didn't hear enough of, or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of
So
sense.
let's really,
Good idea.
really write down what you guys got out of today and what you'd like to hear more of, and what
Yeah,
you would like to
yeah.
relay more, what you feel is more, you know, so important, but you didn't get a chance to say it.
Yeah, one thing I'll say, you know, I've been an apprentice all my life. Like, I went to physical therapy, I went through pre-med, worked in physical therapy, worked in a hospital, left that, and I found what was one of the most well-known therapists in the country, written books, and I just went to his studio and said, I want to learn under you. And I have done the apprentice model for everything that I've learned. I usually put myself in front of nowadays it's a PhD or somebody that I want to mentor, and I listen and I learn. And a lot of the people that I learned from now are in their 20s and 30s, and they have an enormous amount of information that's coming out every day. I mean, it's the stuff that's coming out on, I read 40 medical journals, I read 40 abstracts every morning, at least 40 abstracts a morning that are collated for me, because there is so much cool information about this very topic of like sort of having control over how you age, having control over what can happen to a person. And so, you know, if I could leave you with one thing, it would be your mindset, how open you are to learning and exploring is a huge piece of how aging happens, like how aging will happen. And so in the research environment, it's called an N of 1, which means, you know, you guys are all N of 1 experiments. And so my wife and I look at, well, you know, what are we experimenting with this week? You know, well, I'm fascinated with the microbiome. And there are certain foods that if one eats, they will literally cultivate a version of bacteria that is like the superhero bacteria. And so, you know, I've designed an experiment. Well, I eat this food, and I have for 30 days now, and then I'm watching how is it that I poop, and how do I feel, and what the relationship between your gut now and everything. It's the major lever that pulls all the other levers in your body. And so that openness and that experimental mindset is a big part of coaching, of health coaching, and it's a big part of aging in a certain way. And so I guess that's what I would say, is that all this stuff probably sounds shocking, or maybe a lot of it does, I don't know. It might sound really weird, it might sound fringy, it might sound like woo-woo. On the other hand, staying open and running experiments is sort of like, it's a really key component in, I mean, all of you know that your willingness to try things has made a difference, and that continues. So, I don't know.
Well,
I have to leave now, so just want to say thank you.
Early, no, you can stay right here.
Yeah, is it 3 o'clock? Is it close?
It is 3, it is
Okay,
3.
yeah, I've got to go too. Anyway, it's been fun, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, very good.
All right, guys, we'll keep in touch.
You have some resources you said?
Yeah, if you guys send me your email, I will shoot you links, and if you have specific questions, I'll send you resources for that.
I'll do it.
He'll do it, yeah. He'll do it.
Yeah, but we'll follow up with you and follow up on the questions that were asked tonight and everything. Next month, we have Moffitt Cancer Center, so prepare yourselves.
That's going to be a good one.
But Steve, thank you so much
Sure,
for
you're welcome.
very interesting and stimulating stuff. And
You're welcome to come back to Let them off and, you know, whatever.
Cool.
Oh, yeah,
would you like to
sure.
come back to?
Thanks, thanks.
Open invitation to
Thank
anything.
you. Okay.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Catch you all soon.
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you,
Thanks.
David.
I'm gonna fix that video.